Windows Server Backup is our native solution for creating backups and restoring from them here in Windows Server. In this nugget, we're going to jump right into the virtual lab and start with the basics of Windows Server Backup. We'll learn how to perform a backup, a scheduled backup, or a one-time backup. We'll look at the different types of backups that we can perform and also where we can store them. From there, we'll look at how to back up specific workloads, our Hyper-V hosts and guests, our web servers, Active Directory, and our file servers. Let's get started. We have a 4-machine lab here. Each machine in this lab has a specific kind of workload that we're going to back up. So HVNUG is our Hyper-V host, WebNUG is our web server with IIS, FSNUG is our file server, and DCNUG is our domain controller hosting Active Directory domain services. Now notice we don't have AdminNUG here. HVNUG is going to play the role of our remote administration machine, and that's because client-side Windows does not support Windows Server Backup. Now that doesn't mean we can't send commands, PowerShell commands, or WBadmin, which is the command line version here of Windows Server Backup. We certainly can, but I want to show you a lot of this stuff in the GUI, and the GUI tools are unsupported, so you won't be able to remotely manage any of your Windows Server backups with GUI tools, which is why I've taken AdminNUG out of this lab. So let's start here by logging in to HVNUG. Server Manager is going to launch automatically for us, and the first thing I want to do here is just show you, if you drop down the Tools menu, Windows Server Backup is included, the tool anyway, by default, but if you don't have the actual feature installed, then you won't be able to do anything with it, and this tool will actually let us know when we launch it here and choose Local Backup that we need to install the feature. There it is. Windows Server Backup is not installed on this computer. So we need to do that, and we're actually going to do this in one fell swoop across all 4 of our machines, you guessed it, using a little bit of PowerShell. So let's right-click on that PowerShell icon on the taskbar, run this as an administrator, and I'm just going to get our view straightened up here. There we go. Let's do it. Invoke command, targeting our local machine HVNUG, and then our remote machines. We've got WebNUG, FSNUG, and DCNUG. And we're going to send over to those and install Windows feature. And the feature we're looking here is Windows-Server-Backup, just like so. So I'm going to give this just a second to send that command over to all 4 of those machines and install the feature that we need. All right, and that completed successfully. This does not require a reboot, and Windows Server Backup is now on all 4 of our machines in this lab. And again, if you want to do all of this stuff through PowerShell, let me show you where you can find all these commands. If we do a get command here, the module we're going to pass in, you guessed it, Windows Server Backup, just like so. Here's a list of all the commandlets you can use to perform your backups. Also on the command prompt side of thing, the old school tool there is again WBadmin. And you may recall we used this tool back in a previous nugget, failover clustering, to back up the cluster database. Now we're going to use the GUI here throughout this nugget, so let's go ahead and minimize PowerShell here, and let's head back into Windows Server Backup. If you click off and click back on Local Backup, we should no longer get that message, and now we can start performing backups. So if you right-click on Local Backup here, let's start with our Hyper-V server here, and let's start by creating a backup schedule. So we'll choose that first option here, which will launch us into the wizard for creating a backup. Let's hit next at the Getting Started screen, and that brings us to our first big decision. Do you want to back up everything on this server? This will do a bare metal backup, a system state backup, it'll back up all our volumes, and any applications that you have running on this, which for us means Hyper-V and our virtual machine running in Hyper-V. And by the way, we have a VM running on this machine. In fact, just to show you that real quick before we go any further, I'll go up to run here and type in virtmgmt.msc, and we should see that we have VMNUG running on this machine. There it is. Cool. All right, so we have a Hyper-V host and a Hyper-V guest that we need to back up. All right, back to the wizard here. We're going to choose custom. Notice full server here is 20 gigs. So we'll do custom and just back up some specific things here. Once you hit next, we can hit that add items button on the next screen, and here are our options. And again, these will change depending on the workload. You'll always have bare metal, system state, and then any volumes in here as well as your system partition. But notice because we have Hyper-V, we also have a Hyper-V item in here. Let's go over each one of these. The first one here is a bare metal recovery. Now choosing this will choose all of our system components here as well as our system partition and any volumes you have on here. This is designed to work with the Windows recovery environment to rebuild the server from scratch. Next up, we have system state. This will back up a whole variety of things, the registry, our boot files, our system files, and then also application-specific things. If we had Active Directory on this, this would actually back up sysvol as well as ntds.dit. That's the Active Directory database. If we had failover clustering on here, it would back up the cluster database, again, as we saw in a previous nugget. And also, if we had IIS on here, this would back up the IIS metabase. We'll talk more about that when we get to IIS. So this includes quite a bit of things, but mainly it's always going to include that system-specific stuff, the registry boot files and our system files. Next up, you'll have a list of all of your application-specific things. If we expand Hyper-V here, you'll notice that if we choose Hyper-V, it'll check both of these. This will list all of your VMs as well as the host component. Now, what's nice about backing up Hyper-V at the host level, like we're doing here, is it'll also get all of our host level settings as well as all of our virtual machine configuration settings. You can also do a backup inside, so you can do a guest backup from within the guest operating system using Windows Backup, but that will not capture anything outside of the VM. So any of your configuration settings, it will not back up. So we're going to do this at the host level here. And then, by the way, the system reserved is your system partition, and then again, you'll have any volumes here. We'll talk about backing those up here shortly. But let's start here with just a simple Hyper-V backup. We'll back up everything, our VM, our host, as well as settings in both, and we'll hit OK. Now, we also have these advanced settings, and this is what allows us to set up exclusions. So if you're backing up specific files or directories in the file systems, here's where you could exclude specific files or directories from the backup. Also here on the VSS settings, by default here it's going to do a copy backup, and this is really designed for applications like SQL Server and Exchange, essentially anything that has a transaction log. What this will do is actually retain that transaction log. If you do a full backup here, it'll truncate any transaction logs in those applications. So generally speaking here, you're pretty much just going to use a copy backup if you have applications with transactions logs like SQL and Exchange. Otherwise, you're just going to do a VSS full backup. All right, let's go ahead and hit next in the wizard, and here is where we can schedule it. Now again, Windows Server Backup is incredibly simple. Likely in the real world, you're going to use a third-party solution for backing up because not only can you not back up to tape or optical drives, but you really can only schedule it once or a few times a day within a 24-hour period. So this isn't a super robust tool by any means. It's very bare bones, but it's good for what it does, and it's a nice simple solution that's, again, built into Windows. But let's go ahead and choose a time here. How about we were going to back it up once a day at, say, 2 a.m. There we go. We could also specify more than once a day and specify multiple times, and that's about it for scheduling it. Next is where we choose where we want to back it up to. Our first and recommended option here is to dedicate a disk specifically to backups. What this will do is Windows Server Backup will actually take over that disk and remove it from view anywhere on the system and dedicate it specifically for backups. We'll do this when we get to our file server backup. We can also back up to a volume or to a shared network folder, which is what we're going to do here. So we're going to choose that last option and hit next. And this will give you just a quick message here just to let you know that when you use a remote shared folder for scheduled backups, it will erase the previous backup. So it'll only store that backup once. All right, so we'll go ahead and hit OK. And now we can specify that location, which, by the way, is fsnug. I created a share over there called backups, as you can see there in the drop down. And then within there, I created a directory for each kind of backup. This is going to be our Hyper-V backup. So that is where we'll place this backup. You can also access control here. This is grayed out again for scheduled backups. We can only do an inherit, which means anybody who has access to that remote shared will be able to access and utilize this backup. You can also choose do not inherit when you're doing anything other than a scheduled backup, which means only the individual who's creating the backup will have access to it. So we'll go ahead and hit next here. It'll confirm, and it'll also prompt us since we're on a network share here. So we'll go ahead and pass in the credentials for the domain administrator. There we go. Hit OK. And then just verify here. Here's what it looks like. Everything looks good. And we'll hit finish. And this will just take a second to complete. There it is. Now, it didn't perform the backup. It just created the backup on the schedule. So this backup would kick off at 2 a.m. Now, let's actually perform a backup. I'm going to right-click again on local backup. And this time we're going to do backup once. It's going to walk us through the same wizard, except this time we're going to choose our scheduled backup option. So we're just going to take everything that we configured with that one schedule, and it's going to utilize it to perform the backup. All right, so we've got ourselves a backup here. I'm going to go ahead and close out of the wizard. And now let's say that something happened to our VM. It got hosed, and maybe it was us, maybe it wasn't. It was probably us, because that's what we do. That's how we learn. I've hosed more VMs than I care to count. But let's say, at any level here, maybe we totally messed up a configuration and we don't remember what the old one was. Or maybe we accidentally just totally blew away this VM. Uh-oh, what are we going to do then? In fact, here, I'm going to shut it down and Blow it away. Goodbye, VM. It's gone. How do we get it back? And let's say we also messed up our host level. And I won't go and do that, but we totally could at this point. But let's head back here and let's perform a restore of that VM. So I'll right-click on Backup and we'll choose Recover. First up, we need to choose where our backup lives. Is it on this server? Nope, it's stored in another location. So we'll choose that second option and hit Next. Is it stored on one of our local drives? Nope, it's stored in a remote shared folder, so we'll hit Next. And there we just need to specify where that is. Again, that's over on fsnug, backups, and lives inside of the Hyper-V backups directory. That's all you need to specify there is that directory, and hit Next. Now, if we weren't backing up to a network share, meaning, again, we only have one backup available, maybe we were backing this up to a dedicated disk or a local volume, then chances are we would have lots of backups, especially if we were performing like we should be at least once a day. Here's where it would list all the times for all those backups, and we could choose which time, which would relate to one of those backups in there. And so since we only have one, we don't really need to do anything here, and we can hit Next. Next up, we choose our recovery type. Hyper-V is the only one that applies to this backup, but again, in a backup, you could back up quite a few things: files and folders, volumes, application-specific things, and system state. And here's where you would choose which one you want to recover. So we're going to choose Hyper-V there and hit Next. Next up is where we choose which items we want to recover. So maybe we had lots of VMs and there's only one we needed to recover. We could choose that one. Maybe our host is okay, so we don't need to recover that, which we're not going to do because we know we didn't do anything to our host, so we'll leave that one alone and just restore that VM. We'll hit Next, and here's where we can choose then we want to restore it to its original location, to a different location, or perform a copy. We're going to restore it back to its original location, hit Next, and that's it. Now we can hit Recover, and we're going to get that VM back in business. All right, looks like our restore completed successfully. If we close out of the wizard here, head back into Hyper-V Manager, check it out. We are back in business. We could start it up, and it should start up successfully. That's Windows Server Core on this machine, by the way. But yeah, not too bad, huh? Backing up Hyper-V, easier than ever with this simple tool. All right, before we move on to backing up a web server, let me show you a couple of really useful things you can do here in the UI. Number one, every time you perform a backup or a recovery, it'll log a message. If you double click on this, I'm going to take our backup for example. This will show us the details about that backup. And this link down here is super valuable because it shows you exactly what was backed up. Pops open a text file, and it was our Hyper-V backup, by the way. Shows us all our snapshots were backed up, our virtual machine, these are the settings were backed up, our hard disks were backed up, there's VM NUG. And if we scroll down, we also see our Hyper-V host was backed up. These are all the settings for our Hyper-V host here. So incredibly useful, and you can also get that on the recovery side of things to see what was restored. So we can see here that we just simply restored our VM snapshots, the actual virtual machine settings, and our virtual hard disk. All right, another cool thing down here, if we scroll down, we can see our status, our last backup. That'll just take you to the same details here that we saw. When your next backup, that'll take you to your schedule details. And you can also see all of your backups. And if you scroll down here, you can also see information about your schedule. Another thing here, if you right-click on Local Backup or over here on the right, we have Configure Performance Settings. This will essentially allow you to tweak how the type of backup that it's going to take. Normal here, think of this as a full backup. Faster backup performance means it's going to take an incremental backup. This is exactly what we call in the database world as a differential backup, right? It's only going to take up or back up the things that have changed since the last full backup. And of course, you can customize this as well for each individual volume as well as our system partition there if you want to perform a full or an incremental. All right, I'm going to stick with normal there, though, for this one. And that's it. Now, let's back up our web server, WebNug, and we're going to do this remotely. I'm going to show you a little trick here that you can use to back it up remotely. Now, of course, you can fire up the MMC, snap in, add the Windows Server backup module, and point it at a machine. But a really easy way to do it is through Server Manager here. If you go to All Servers, right-click on the server you're looking for here. We're going to do WebNug, and launch Computer Management. This will hook us right in to that machine. And, of course, we'll have all of our other tools as well if you need to do any sort of other remote administration of that machine or, monitor performance. But notice here, we have Windows Server Backup. If we expand this, I'm just going to maximize this here. Expand this, choose Local Backup. We are now, even though it says Local Backup, believe it or not, we are actually on WebNug managing backups. And you'll see this isn't the local machine because it won't have any backups on it like we just did on our Hyper-V machine. See this? No backup has been configured. And you can actually truly tell that we're on WebNug up here because it shows that we're connected to it. Now, for our web servers and IIS specifically, there's two critical components that we need to back up. One is IIS itself and all of its configuration, known as the IIS metabase. The second side of that is backing up our websites and our web applications. Let me show you where both of these are on disk first. So let's open up File Explorer, and let's go right through the administrative share over on WebNug. $. In here, first let me show you the IIS metabase. It's in Windows System 32, and it's called iNet SRV. So I'm going to start typing in iNet SRV. There it is. So everything inside of here you will want to back up. And this is, by the way, backed up automatically in system state if you have IIS installed on your machine, as we do. I'm going to show you, though, why you would possibly want to do this separately when we get there. The other thing you want to back up, again, is your websites, which you can find in inetpub, www.root. And there we go. So we have all of our websites or web applications in here. Or if you have virtual directories pointing to other locations, then you'll want to make sure that those are backed up as well. But those are the two critical components. Let's perform a backup here. Let's right-click and choose Backup Once. In the wizard here, we're going to choose different options. Notice we're not scheduling it this time. We're going to go ahead and choose Custom and hit Next. We'll choose Add Items. And again, here you can choose System State, which will back up everything we talked about before, the registry, our boot files, our system files, plus the IIS metabase. Now, if you didn't want to back up everything else along with the IIS metabase, you wanted to do it individually, then this is where you could just simply back up those directories individually. There's also a PowerShell commandlet called Backup Web Configuration. You give it a name, and it'll actually create back up all that IIS metabase into one single backup file for you. But let's go ahead and choose System State here for this one, and let's also, that's again for the metabase for IIS configuration, and let's also expand the C drive here, go into inetpub, and let's back up www.root, which in this case contains our default website, and we'll hit OK. We'll hit Next here. We'll choose our destination again as a remote shared folder. And again, this lives over on FSNUG. We've got a directory over there called Backups. And in there I created a directory called IIS Backups, just like so. And we'll go ahead. And notice this isn't a scheduled, so we have control here if we want to do not inherit or inherit. We'll just stick with inherit there and hit Next. We'll provide our credentials for the share. And that's it. Little confirmation page, and now we can hit Backup. All right, mine just completed, and that has now been successfully backed up. Now, if something happened either to our websites or to IIS itself and its configuration, we can walk through the recovery wizard once again. Our backup is stored in another location. It's a remote file share here, which is fsnug backups IIS space backups. And hit Next. Here we need to provide our credentials again for that share. Specify our backup time. Again, there's only going to be one here, so we'll hit Next. And here's where we would choose either System State for the IIS metabase for IIS configuration, or Files and Folders if we wanted to recover just specifically our websites here, since we backed that up. And here it is, WebNug. If we expand this, we should see under local disk that we have inetpub here backed up. So we could choose this, and it'll restore both of these directories back to the state they were in this backup. I'm going to cancel out of this, though, because you get the idea. Also, our message, if we open this up, notice here, because we did a remote restore backup, I should say, that you would need to go over to WebNug and look at the backup. But this log will contain exactly what it looked like in our previous one. It'll show us that all of IIS's configuration files were backed up. Next up, let's back up Active Directory. I'm going to right-click on Computer Management up here, connect to another computer, and this time we're going to connect to our domain controller, DCNUG. There we go. If we expand storage and expand Windows Server Backup and hit Local Backup here, we should see once again we'll be starting from scratch on this machine since we have yet to perform any backups. So let's go ahead and do a one-time backup here on DCNUG. I'm going to right-click Local Backup, choose Backup Once, and walk through this wizard again. Again, we've never created a schedule on here, so we need to manually define all of those options in this wizard. We'll hit Next. We'll choose Custom. And again, to back up Active Directory, when you hit Add Items here, that is all stored in System State. If you have Active Directory certificate services installed on your domain controller, it'll back up the database. If you have Active Directory domain services, it'll back up both ntds.dit as well as the sysvol directory. So you can hit OK here, and that's really all you need to do is back up System State. The thing you really need to remember, though, is when you perform a restore of Active Directory, you will want to make sure that you reboot your domain controller into Active Directory restore mode, so DSRM mode as we call that, and then you can perform an authoritative restore of the database. Let's go ahead and store this in our remote location as well here. Active space directory space backups. Perfect, and we'll go ahead and hit Next. Provide our credentials, hit OK, and hit Backup. All right, mine just completed as well. Here is that backup. Again, we can get all the details and even look at the log to see what it backed up. Now, if anything were to happen to Active Directory, we could restore it to that point in time. Now, our last one here is going to be fun. We're going to back up our file server, including all of those backups that we just took, and we're going to dedicate a disk to it. So I'm going to open up File Explorer here, and let's just browse over to that share. It's called Backups over there on FSNUG. So here's all the backups we just took. There's our Active Directory backup. There's DCNUG. Here it is. And by the way, all of these backups are actually stored inside of VHDXs. So yeah, you can actually mount these and look inside. Every single one of them that we've taken, whether it was system state, a volume backup, a Hyper-V backup, they're all stored inside of a VHDX. All right, so we're going to back up everything on FSNUG. Let's get a connection to it here in Computer Management. Right-click, choose Connect to Computer, and we'll type in FSNUG. Once we get that connection, let's expand storage, expand Windows Server Backup, and choose Local Backup. Now, the only way we can dedicate a disk to our backups is through a scheduled backup, not a one-time run. So this time, let's create a scheduled backup here. We'll right-click, choose Backup Schedule, and walk through this wizard. We'll hit Next here. We're going to choose Custom, hit Next, and we'll add some items in here. We're going to add in our D drive there, which contains our share, and hit OK. We'll also hit Advanced Settings here. And let's add an exclusion in here, actually, because inside of that D drive in our backup share, I also had a directory in here called File Server Backups, but we didn't use that. So this is a good example of when to use an exclusion. Rather than include all of these, we can just simply exclude this File Server Backup, and that will no longer be included in our backup. You can also choose here folders or subfolders. We'll choose yes, though, even though there are none in there. Now, on VSS settings, we're also going to turn this to a full backup rather than a copy-only backup, and hit OK. Now we can hit Next. Here's where we can choose our schedule. I'll leave the default there and hit Next. And our destination type, we can now choose to dedicated disk for backups. So once we hit Next here, we can hit Show Available Disks to show our local disks attached to the system. And we're going to choose number 2 here, which is our B volume. Hit OK. And now we can select it and hit Next. And it's just going to give us a little warning here, letting us know that it's going to completely erase the disk. It's not going to be visible in File Explorers. It's going to be entirely dedicated to backups. So we'll hit Yes, that's fine. And that's it. We hit Finish, and we're done. And since that's scheduled, it won't run right away, but it'll run tonight at 9 o'clock. And of course, now we can run our backup based on that schedule. So we can hit Backup once here, choose our scheduled backup options, and this will just show us that entire schedule. We'll hit Backup, and it's now going to back it up to that dedicated disk. And that's it. We now have a backup of our backups on a dedicated disk. In this CBT nugget, we learned how to use the built-in Windows Server backup utility to perform backup and restore operations against Hyper-V, IIS, Active Directory, and file server workloads. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.